The beginning was anything but predictable. It all kicked off with a locked door. That Friday evening, I arrived home earlier than usual, around 6:30 p.m. Carol, my wife, had been working remotely for the past year, managing some marketing gig she'd picked up after declaring she was too restless to just be a stay-at-home mom. Typically, when I walked through the door, I'd hear her chatting away on a call or furiously typing on her laptop in the kitchen. But that day, silence. A heavy, unsettling silence. I paused in the foyer, a box of cupcakes in my hand. A little surprise for the kids to start the weekend off on a sweet note. "Carol," I called out, my voice echoing faintly. "You here?" Nothing. The air inside the house felt off, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I climbed the stairs, thinking she might be napping or wrapped up in some work call. That's when I noticed it. The door to our bedroom was closed. Now, let me tell you, in 12 years of marriage, we never closed that door unless someone was getting dressed or feeling under the weather. It was one of those little quirks of our life together, an unspoken norm. But here it was shut tight, and not just shut, locked. I knocked lightly. "Carol?" I waited. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. "Carol? Everything okay in there?" There was a brief pause, then a muffled voice. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just finishing something up. Be down in a minute." Finishing something? In our locked bedroom? At 6:30 in the evening? My pulse quickened, though I couldn't quite explain why. I tried to brush off the unease, forcing a chuckle. "What are you doing? Hiding Christmas presents or something?" Her laugh followed, but it was off. Too quick, too forced, and a little too high-pitched. "Yeah, exactly. Just don't come in, okay?" She wasn't even trying to sound convincing. I stood there, staring at the door, my stomach churning with a strange sense of dread. Something was going on in that room, something she clearly didn't want me to know about. And then I heard it, a faint sound, like fabric brushing against fabric, followed by a whisper, low, urgent, and unmistakably not hers. My chest tightened. "Carol?" I asked again, my voice edged with tension. "Who's in there with you?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, there was a shuffle, the unmistakable sound of someone moving around, hurried, almost panicked. My mind spiraled, conjuring every horrible scenario imaginable. "Carol!" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Open the damn door right now." Her reply was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "I said I'll be down in a minute, Derek." But by then, I didn't care what she said. My patience and my composure were gone. I grabbed the handle and pulled, but the lock held firm. Without a second thought, I threw my weight against the door. It took 2 hard slams before the lock finally gave way, the door crashing open with a resounding crack. What I saw froze me in place. Carol stood by the bed, pale as a sheet, her hands gripping the mattress like it was her lifeline. And there, half hidden behind the closet door, was a man. He looked to be in his mid-30s, a few years younger than me, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs. His shirt lay crumpled on the floor beside him. I stared at him, then at her, my mind struggling to process the scene in front of me. "What the hell is this?" I managed to ask, my voice low and trembling. Carol opened her mouth, then closed it, her expression unreadable. She didn't look sorry. She didn't even look embarrassed. If anything, she seemed irritated, like I just barged in and interrupted her plans. "Derek?" she said, sighing heavily, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "You weren't supposed to be home yet." That one sentence hit me harder than anything else. Not an explanation, not a denial, not even a token attempt at damage control. Just "you weren't supposed to be home yet." The guy, whoever the hell he was, scrambled to pick up his jeans from the floor. Look, man. I should probably go," he stammered, his voice trembling. "You think?" I snapped, stepping toward him with barely contained rage. He flinched, clutching his clothes to his chest as he inched toward the door like a cornered animal. Every muscle in my body screamed to knock him flat, but before I could act, he darted out of the room, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, it was only me and Carol, standing in the wreckage of whatever our marriage used to be. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. "How long has this been going on?" She crossed her arms, still refusing to meet my gaze. "Does it matter?" Her words hit me harder than any punch could have. I stared at her, dumbfounded. There was no apology, no regret, just cold, detached indifference. "Does it matter? Are you serious right now?" I yelled, my voice rising with every word. "We have a family, Carol. 2 kids. And this is what you're doing while I'm out working." She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Oh, don't start with the family speech, Derek. You're never around. You work late. You barely even talk to me anymore. And honestly," she paused, her tone dripping with disdain, "you're boring." I needed more. Her words cut deep, each one a dagger straight to the heart. Boring? I was busting my ass to give her and our kids a good life, and this was what I got? I stood there, staring at the woman I had loved for 15 years, and suddenly I realized I didn't recognize her anymore. Maybe I never really had. That's when the decision came to me, sharp and clear. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I went straight to the kids' bedrooms and told Stanley and Ella to pack a bag. "We're going on an adventure," I said, trying to sound upbeat. Carol didn't follow me. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't even come downstairs. When she came home later, likely after finishing her evening with her lover, the kids and I were already gone. That was just the start. The 30-minute drive to the motel felt like it stretched on forever. Stanley sat in the back seat with Ella, both of them chatting and laughing, blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside me. With each mile, I felt the life I'd worked so hard to hold together crumbling further. Ella, clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn, leaned forward and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy? Isn't she coming with us?" For a moment I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, like all the air had been sucked out of the car. How was I supposed to answer a question like that? To a 6-year-old? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Mommy had to stay home, sweetie," I said, forcing my voice to sound calm. "This is just a special trip for us." Stanley, ever the perceptive one, narrowed his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Is Mommy mad at you? Did you guys have a fight?" His question was like a punch to the gut. My son, my little boy, already knew to tiptoe around tension. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. I wanted to scream, to tell him how much I hated that he even had to ask. But instead, I plastered on a shaky smile. "No, buddy. Everything's fine. Just relax and enjoy the ride." Okay. When we finally pulled into the parking lot of the dingy motel on the edge of town, Stanley wrinkled his nose. "This doesn't look like a fun trip," he muttered under his breath. I didn't respond. I parked the car, climbed out, and checked us into a room with 2 double beds. The receptionist didn't say much, but the look she gave me, like she knew exactly what kind of night I was having, made my skin crawl. Inside the room, the kids immediately claimed the bed closest to the TV and started bickering over which channel to watch. I sat on the other bed, staring blankly at the faded, peeling wallpaper. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the chaos my life had become in just a matter of hours. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was her. "Carol. Carol, where are you?" "Carol, Derek, this isn't funny. Bring the kids home." "Carol, answer me. We need to talk." Talk? Now she wanted to talk? I stared at the glowing screen, my thumb hovering over the block button. A part of me wanted to cut her off entirely, to sever whatever connection still remained. But blocking her wouldn't solve anything. Not yet. I needed time. Time to think, to plan my next move. So I didn't respond. An hour passed, and the texts turned into calls. One after another, my phone buzzed, vibrating like a relentless accusation. I let them all go to voicemail. After the 5th call, she left a message. "Derek, stop being dramatic. Bring the kids home. I don't have time for this." No apology. No concern for Stanley or Ella. Just irritation. Annoyed that I disrupted her evening. I could picture her pacing around the living room, phone in hand, probably texting him about how difficult I was being. My fingers itched to hurl the phone across the room, to smash it against the peeling wallpaper. But instead, I shoved it deep into my pocket and turned to the kids. "All right, guys," I said, forcing a smile and an ounce of cheer into my voice. "Who's up for pizza?" Their faces lit up instantly. Whatever storm I was weathering, at least they were still innocent, still shielded from the chaos. I ordered delivery from the first place that popped up on my phone. While we waited, I helped Stanley connect his Nintendo Switch to the motel TV. Ella climbed onto my lap, chattering about how she was going to beat her brother at Mario Kart. For a fleeting moment, things almost felt normal. Almost. When the pizza arrived, we ate sitting on the beds, the kids giggling between bites as they traded ridiculous jokes they'd made up on the spot. I laughed along with them, even though my thoughts were somewhere far away. Every few minutes, my eyes darted to the window, half expecting Carol to burst in, dramatic and furious. I didn't know what I'd do if she showed up. I only knew I wouldn't back down. After the kids finally fell asleep, I sat in the dark, my phone glowing on the nightstand. The weight of the situation bore down on me like a physical thing. This wasn't just about Carol cheating. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about my kids. The life I wanted for them. The life I wanted for myself. I opened my photo gallery and started scrolling. Image after image passed by. Family vacations, birthday parties, lazy Sunday mornings on the couch. Carol smiled in every single one, playing the part of the perfect wife and mother. But for the first time, I wondered how much of it had ever been real. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Another text from her. "Carol, you don't have the right to take them like this. Bring them back now or I'll call the police." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and sharp. The police? For what? For protecting my kids from whatever disaster she was turning our house into? Let her call them. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Still, I knew we couldn't stay holed up in that rundown motel forever. Carol wasn't stupid. She'd figure out where we were eventually. And I wasn't about to have that confrontation in front of Stanley and Ella. I needed to buy time, enough to make this separation permanent. I picked up my phone and typed a response, keeping it short and cold. "Me, the kids are safe. I'll call you when I'm ready." Her reply came within seconds. "Carol, you're overreacting. Don't do something you'll regret." Regret? If only she knew. I regretted plenty. Ignoring the warning signs, trusting her, letting her turn me into some predictable, dependable fool while she crept around behind my back. But taking my kids and walking away? That wasn't one of them. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. By morning, I had a plan. The game wasn't over. It was only just beginning. When I woke up the next morning, the kids were still asleep, their small bodies curled together under the thin, scratchy motel blanket. For a while, I just sat on the edge of the bed, watching them breathe. They had no idea their world was about to shift, that everything they knew was changing. I couldn't let them grow up in a home built on lies. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let Carol waltz back into our lives after what she'd done. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. Slipping into the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. My bloodshot eyes stared back at me, and my jaw was clenched so tightly it felt like my teeth might crack. I looked like hell, no doubt about it. But beneath the exhaustion and anger, there was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Focus. Carol had made two critical mistakes. The first was thinking I'd just roll over and take this. The second was underestimating how far I'd go to protect what mattered most to me. By the time Stanley and Ella woke up, I'd already found us a cabin to rent, about 2 hours away on the edge of a quiet lake. It wasn't much, just a little place tucked away from the chaos, but it would give me the space I needed to think. I told the kids it was a mini vacation, and their excitement about the lake kept them from asking too many questions. Carol, of course, was another story. As we packed up the car, my phone vibrated constantly. Calls, texts, voicemails, it was relentless. I ignored every single one, shoving the phone into my pocket to drown out the noise. But just as I was loading the last bag, it buzzed again. This time, I glanced at the screen and froze. It wasn't Carol. It was Bonnie, her best friend. Bonnie, Derek? What's going on? Carol is freaking out. Can we talk? For a second, I considered ignoring her too. But then an idea flickered, and I realized Bonnie might be exactly who I needed to hear from. I typed back a quick reply. Me sure. Call me in 20 minutes. We hit the road not long after, the kids chattering in the back seat about breakfast and arguing over who'd get the biggest pancake. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, calculating my next steps. Right on time, Bonnie called. I turned the radio down, made sure the kids were preoccupied, and answered. Derek. Her voice was careful, almost hesitant. Hey, Bonnie, I said evenly. Let me guess, Carol sent you? She didn't send me, Bonnie said defensively. She's just worried. She said you took the kids without telling her. Is that true? I almost laughed. Did she tell you why? The line went quiet for a moment. Then, no, Bonnie admitted. She just said you were upset. And look, I'm not trying to take sides here. I just want to make sure you're okay. We're fine. The kids are fine. But since you're asking, let me tell you what's really going on. And I did. I laid everything out for her. The locked bedroom door, the guy half-dressed in his underwear, and Carol's complete indifference when I confronted her. By the time I finished, Bonnie wasn't saying a word. You're kidding, she finally said, her voice low, but there was something in her tone, something that told me she wasn't surprised. You knew, didn't you? I pressed, my heart pounding. What? No, I mean... She hesitated, her words faltering. I suspected something was going on, but Carol never told me anything outright. I swear. I didn't know if she was telling the truth, and honestly, I didn't care. Look, Bonnie, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not calling you to point fingers. I just need to know if there's anything else. Has she said anything to you? Mentioned anyone? There was another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear Bonnie debating whether to stay loyal to Carol or do the right thing. Finally, she sighed. There's a guy, she admitted reluctantly. I don't know his name, but she's mentioned him a couple of times. She said he was exciting. Bonnie's voice dropped, almost like she didn't want to admit it, that he made her feel alive. I could hear the discomfort in her tone, but it didn't soften the blow. My chest tightened. Exciting. She needed excitement. Derek, I didn't know it had gone this far, Bonnie continued, her words quiet, almost pleading. I thought she was just venting. Venting, I repeated, my voice cold and sharp. She locked me out of my own bedroom, Bonnie. She brought him into my house. Does that sound like venting to you? Bonnie didn't answer. She didn't need to, her silence said it all. Thanks for your honesty, I said flatly, my voice like ice. Tell Carol I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Without waiting for a response, I hung up. That was all I needed to hear. Whoever this Thomas guy was, he wasn't just a fling. He was Carol's escape hatch, the excuse she'd been looking for to ditch a life she'd decided wasn't enough for her. But she'd made a mistake. She'd underestimated me. Later that night, after the kids were fast asleep in the cozy cabin we'd settled into, I sat at the small kitchen table with a beer and my laptop. My thoughts were razor-sharp, and a plan began to form in my head. This wasn't going to be about yelling or breaking things. No, revenge wasn't about theatrics. It was about precision. Carol needed to understand, in no uncertain terms, that she'd wrecked the wrong man. She wanted excitement. She wanted freedom. Fine. I'd give her exactly that. Just not in the way she expected. Finding Thomas turned out to be almost too easy. People like Carol, who live double lives, always leave breadcrumbs. And she wasn't exactly careful. It started with her email account. I'd set it up for her years ago when she needed help getting organized. What she didn't know was that I'd linked it to an old backup email of mine. I never thought I'd have a reason to use it, until now. Logging in was like walking into a room she'd forgotten to lock. I wasn't prepared for how much I found. Flirty messages. Vague but unmistakable innuendos. Even a reservation for a hotel she'd once claimed was for a networking event. It didn't take long to find a name. Thomas Farrell. Thomas. Even his name sounded like someone who'd think he was special for owning a leather jacket and posting gym selfies. The emails between them painted a stomach-turning picture. Inside jokes, pet names, plans to meet up while I was at work. And the part that really made my blood boil? She'd forwarded him pictures of my kids. Stanley and Ella. She'd brought this guy into our world. Let him peek into the life I'd worked so hard to build. All while keeping me completely in the dark. She had taken something sacred and turned it into a cheap joke. My hands clenched into fists, and it took everything I had not to slam the laptop shut in anger. But I couldn't let my emotions take over. Not now. I needed to stay focused. I needed more information. A quick social media search for his name was all it took. There he was, Thomas Farrell, the walking, talking midlife crisis cliché. His profile was public because of course it was. The guy had it all. Shirtless hiking pictures, captions like, "Rise and grind" under gym selfies, and a motorcycle. Naturally. He looked a few years younger than me, closer to Carol's age. Fit, smug, and exactly the kind of guy who thought breaking up a family made him irresistible. As I scrolled through his posts, something clicked. The locations. Thomas didn't just live nearby, he was practically a neighbor. Less than 30 minutes from my house. Suddenly, all the excuses Carol had been giving me, the networking events, the girls' nights, her sudden obsession with the gym, it all made sense. Everything had been orchestrated. Every detail of her double life had been meticulously planned so she could spend time with him. And now I knew. She hadn't just cheated. She'd turned our life, our family, into her playground. That realization kept me awake deep into the night. I sat hunched over my laptop, studying every detail I could find about Thomas. His habits, his hangouts, his routine. It didn't take long to piece it all together. He was a personal trainer, which explained Carol's sudden fitness obsession. His social media was practically a diary. Every Friday morning, he posted pictures from the same coffee shop. Saturday nights? He could usually be found at a local bar with his crew, guys who looked like they came out of the same smug, muscle-bound mold as Thomas himself. By the time the sun started creeping over the horizon, I had everything I needed. But confronting him outright, that would have been too easy, too quick. No, I didn't want to fight. I wanted to dismantle his little fantasy world. Carol thought he was some kind of escape. I was about to show her exactly what she'd blown up her life for. The next day, I focused on Stanley and Ella, doing everything I could to keep the storm brewing inside me from touching them. They didn't know what was happening, and I wasn't about to shatter their innocence. For them, this was just a fun little vacation, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. By evening, my plan was solid. After arranging for a babysitter, a kind older woman who ran the cabins and was happy to help for a small fee, I headed into town. I parked a few blocks away from Thomas's favorite bar and made my way inside. The place was crowded, loud, and smelled like stale beer and sweat. It didn't take long to spot him. Thomas was near the pool table, surrounded by his crew. They were like carbon copies of him, tight shirts, too much cologne, and that cocky, overconfident grin. Thomas had his arms slung lazily around a woman who wasn't Carol. Interesting. I ordered a drink and leaned against the wall, watching. The girl couldn't have been more than 25, and she hung on his every word, laughing at all his tired, recycled jokes. I watched as he leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle like she was auditioning for a rom-com. So this was the man Carol had decided was worth destroying her life for. A walking cliché who clearly couldn't spell commitment, let alone live it. I waited until he headed to the bar for another drink. Then I made my move. "Thomas Farrell?" I said, stepping up beside him. He turned, surprised. "Yeah? Who's asking?" For a moment I just looked at him, really looked at him. He had that smug, self-satisfied aura, the kind that comes from coasting through life on charm and good looks. Turned my stomach. "My name's Derek," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We have a mutual friend." He frowned, confused. "I don't think I know you, man." "You don't?" I replied. But you know my wife, Carol. The color drained from his face so fast it was almost funny. He stammered, "Oh, relax," I said, holding up a hand. "I'm not here to fight you." That threw him off even more. He glanced around, probably searching for backup, but his friends were too busy with their beers and pool cues to notice. "I just wanted to meet the guy who's been sneaking around with her," I continued, keeping my tone casual. "It's not every day you get to shake hands with the guy who wrecked your marriage." "Look, man, save it." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "I already know everything. The emails, the hotel reservations, the meetups. I'm not here to make a scene. I just want to know one thing." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "What? Does she know?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Does she know what?" he said, trying to play dumb. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a deadly calm. "Does she know about the other women?" His eyes widened, but he said nothing. "Because from where I'm standing," I added, stepping back, "it doesn't look like she's the only one you've been keeping busy with." He froze, his eyes flickering toward the girl he'd been flirting with. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his posture stiff with tension. Then he cleared his throat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," I said with a cold smile. "Enjoy your night, Thomas. And don't worry, I'll make sure Carol gets the full story." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there pale and visibly shaken. Step 1. Plant the seed. Let him panic. Let him wonder if his little web of lies was about to unravel. Step 2. That would come soon enough. The next morning, I sat at the edge of the dock behind the cabin, watching the mist drift lazily over the lake. Inside, the kids were eating cereal and laughing at cartoons, their voices echoing faintly through the walls. The peaceful scene outside was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. Carol had texted me twice that morning. "Carol, are you ready to stop this nonsense yet? Carol, we need to talk about the kids. Stop dragging this out." Not a word about what she'd done. No apology. No accountability. Just pure, unfiltered arrogance. Like I was the unreasonable one for not pretending everything was fine. She didn't know I'd met Thomas. She didn't know what I'd uncovered. And she definitely didn't know what I was planning. I pulled out my phone and typed a response, deliberate and to the point. "Me, let's talk." Her reply came immediately. "Carol, finally." "Where?" "Me, at the house. Be there at noon." "Alone." The word alone was important. This was between me and her, and I wasn't about to let her drag Thomas into it. By 11:30, I dropped the kids off with the babysitter and was driving toward the house. The roads were familiar, but everything about the drive felt alien. The house wasn't a home anymore, it was a crime scene. Her crime. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. She sat on the front steps, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. As I got out of the car, she looked up, giving me a tight, irritated smile. "About time," she said, standing and crossing her arms. "I've been waiting." I ignored her and walked past her, unlocking the front door. She followed me inside, the click of her heels echoing on the hardwood floor. "So, are you done playing the victim? Or are we going to have an actual conversation?" she asked sharply. I leaned against the kitchen counter and turned to face her. "We'll talk. But first, I want to hear you say it." She frowned. "Say what?" "Say what you did." She rolled her eyes like I just asked her to name every star in the galaxy. "Derek, don't be ridiculous. We both know why we're here. I don't need to spell it out for you." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice calm and steady. "No, you do need to spell it out. I want to hear you say it. Admit it." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she let out a bitter laugh. "Fine." She threw her hands in the air. "You want me to say it? I cheated on you. There. Happy now?" "Happy?" The word hit me like a slap in the face. "No," I said quietly, shaking my head. "But at least now you've said it." She leaned against the table, arms crossed defensively. "Derek, don't act like this is all on me. Our marriage has been dead for years. You're always working, always distracted. You've been checked out for ages. What did you expect me to do? Sit around and wait for you to notice me? Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. So this is my fault? It's not about fault, she snapped. It's about reality. You stopped trying, Derek. You stopped being exciting. I needed more. More. Like Thomas, I said, raising an eyebrow. That shut her up. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Yeah, I continued, my voice like ice. I met him. Nice guy, really. Seemed busy, though. Too busy to mention that he's been sleeping with half the women in town. Carol's face flushed red. That's not true, isn't it? I asked, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you blew up our family for a guy who doesn't even take you seriously. She looked away, her jaw tightening. For the first time, I saw something crack in her arrogant facade. Doubt. I didn't come here to fight, I said, easing back. I came to tell you what's going to happen next. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done playing games, I said firmly. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make damn sure the kids stay with me. She laughed sharply, but it sounded forced. You think you can just take them from me? Good luck with that, Derek. No court is going to side with you over their mother. I pulled out my phone and opened an app I downloaded the night before. You sure about that? I asked, holding it up so she could see. Her eyes darted to the screen, and for the first time, real panic flashed across her face. What is that? She demanded, her voice sharp. Proof, I replied calmly. Of everything. The texts, the emails, the hotel reservations. Even the video I got last night of Thomas flirting with that girl at the bar. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And trust me, Carol, the courts will be very interested to see just how dedicated you've been to this family. Her face went pale, all traces of her usual arrogance gone. You wouldn't, she whispered. Try me, I said flatly. For a moment, the room was deathly quiet. Carol stared at me, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. Then, she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't the bitter, irritated laugh from earlier. This one was darker, colder, dripping with malice. Fine, she said, her voice icy. You want to play dirty? Let's play dirty. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you take my kids away from me. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I locked eyes with her, my expression unflinching. They're not your kids, I said quietly. They're ours, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. From you. Carol didn't respond. She grabbed her bag, spun on her heel, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her with a force that rattled the windows. The moment the door closed, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The silence in the house was heavy, almost suffocating. I wanted to feel triumphant, like I just claimed the upper hand in a long, grueling battle. But the truth was, my hands were shaking, and my stomach churned. This wasn't a fight I wanted, but it was one I couldn't afford to lose. I sat down at the kitchen table, my phone still in my hand. The evidence I'd gathered was neatly stored in a single folder. Texts, emails, screenshots of her messages with Thomas, and the video of him cozying up to that girl at the bar. It was a damning collection, and I planned to take it straight to my lawyer first thing Monday morning. But there was something else I needed to do, something that had nothing to do with legal strategies or custody battles. This wasn't just about protecting my kids anymore. This was about reclaiming my life from the wreckage Carol had created. I opened Facebook. I hadn't posted anything in years. Social media wasn't my thing. But this moment felt different, too important to let slide. I scrolled through my photos until I found one from a couple of years ago. Carol and me at a friend's wedding. It was the kind of picture people love to see. Perfect smiles, her arm draped around my shoulder as she laughed. We looked happy. We looked real. I typed a caption. Funny how a photo can lie. Behind the smiles are years of deceit. Behind the laughter, betrayal. Behind her hand on my shoulder, a knife perfectly aimed. But don't worry, the truth always comes out. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit post. I wasn't usually one for public drama, but this wasn't about airing my dirty laundry. It was about tearing down the facade Carol had built. The perfect wife, the perfect mother. She'd curated that image for years, and I wanted her to know I wasn't afraid to shatter it. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. Friends, coworkers, even some of Carol's family chimed in. Most were shocked, a few were supportive, and some were downright nosy, fishing for details. I didn't reply to any of them. That wasn't the point. By the time I put my phone down, my head was pounding. I hadn't slept much in days, and the weight of everything, the betrayal, the fight, the future, was finally catching up with me. I needed air. Grabbing my jacket, I stepped outside, letting the crisp autumn breeze cut through the fog of frustration clouding my mind. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. The kind of suburban stillness that used to feel reassuring now felt mocking, like the world was quietly laughing at the mess my life had become. I hadn't made it far when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Bonnie's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But then I remembered the way her voice had wavered during our last conversation. The guilt that crept into her tone. "Derek," she said as soon as I picked up, her voice low and urgent. "What the hell is going on? Carol just called me and she's losing it. She says you're trying to ruin her life." "Ruin her life?" I said, my voice cold. "She ruined it herself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." Bonnie sighed heavily. "Look, I get it. What she did was awful, and you have every right to be angry. But putting it all out there on social media? That's not helping anyone. Especially not the kids." Her words stung, though I refused to let it show. "Don't lecture me, Bonnie. You knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. And you said nothing. So don't pretend to care about the kids now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Bonnie finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost apologetic. "You're right. I should have said something. I didn't know how. Carol's always been intense. And honestly, I didn't think she'd go this far." "She didn't just go far," I said bitterly. "She burned it all to the ground." "I'm sorry, Derek. I really am." She hesitated, then added cautiously, "But you need to be careful. Carol's not going to take this lying down. You know how she is. She doesn't lose, not without a fight." I smirked, though it lacked any humor. "Good. Let her fight. I'm ready." Bonnie didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her tone was more serious. "Just don't let this consume you, okay? The kids need you. Don't lose sight of that." The call ended shortly after, but her words lingered in my mind. She was right about one thing: Stanley and Ella were my priority. They had to be. But what Bonnie didn't understand was that this fight was for them. For their safety, their future. For the life they deserved, not the one Carol had thrown away. As I walked back into the house, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Carol this time. "Carol, you want to play dirty? Fine. But don't forget, Derek, I know things about you too. You're not as perfect as you like to pretend. Let's see how everyone reacts when I start telling my side of the story." Part of me wanted to laugh. Of course, she'd try to twist this into a war of perception, twisting the narrative to make herself the victim. But unlike her, I didn't have skeletons in my closet. My only crime was trusting her. I quickly typed out a reply. "Me, tell whoever you want. But remember this. I'm not the one who cheated. I'm not the one who lied. And I'm not the one who brought a stranger into our kids' lives. Keep digging that hole, Carol. I'll be waiting at the bottom." I hit send and tossed the phone onto the counter. This wasn't just about me and Carol anymore. It was about control, control of the truth, control of the narrative, and control of the future. And I was done letting her call the shots. Standing there in the kitchen, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Carol wanted a fight and she'd get one. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. Her threat didn't scare me. If anything, it pissed me off. The idea that she thought she could twist the truth, paint me as the villain after everything she'd done, was almost laughable. Almost The thing about Carol is that she's never had to face real consequences. She's a master at twisting situations to her advantage, spinning tales that make her look like the victim. In high school, she convinced a teacher that her dog really did eat her homework. In college, she cried her way out of a speeding ticket by making up a story about a family emergency. And with me, she was the queen of dodging blame, turning every argument into a case of poor Carol. But not this time. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office. His name was Oscar, straightforward, no nonsense, and as sharp as they come. He had a receding hairline, a tailored suit, and a gaze so piercing it could make anyone squirm. A friend who'd endured a messy divorce had recommended him, and within 5 minutes I understood why. "So, let me get this straight," Oscar said, leaning back in his chair. "Your wife cheated on you, repeatedly, brought her lover into your home, and now she's threatening to fight for custody. That's the gist of it," I replied. Oscar nodded, tapping his pen rhythmically against the desk. "Do you have evidence?" I pulled out my phone and slid it across the desk. Texts, emails, and even a video of her lover hitting on another woman at a bar. "It's all there." He picked up the phone and started scrolling through the folder I'd meticulously prepared. His eyebrows rose a few times, and at one point he let out a low whistle. "This is substantial," he said, setting the phone down and looking me in the eye. "The courts won't look kindly on her behavior, especially if we can prove she was neglecting the kids to carry on this affair. Do you have anything showing she was unavailable for them?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but I wouldn't be surprised if there's more to uncover. She's been distracted for months." Oscar nodded again, his expression thoughtful. "All right, here's the plan. First, we'll file for divorce citing infidelity as the cause. Then we'll build your case for custody. The goal is to demonstrate that you're the more stable parent, the one who prioritizes the kids' well-being." I leaned forward. "And if she tries to smear me, paint me as the bad guy?" Oscar smirked, a glint of confidence in his eyes. "Let her try. If she throws dirt, we'll throw evidence. The courts don't care about petty drama. They care about facts. And from what I've seen so far, the facts are on your side." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Before I left his office, Oscar handed me a list of tasks. Gather more evidence, document every interaction with Carol, and, most importantly, stay calm. "Don't give her anything she can use against you," he warned. "No angry texts, no shouting matches. Keep it professional." It was easier said than done, but I was determined to follow his advice. When I returned to the cabin that afternoon, the kids were outside by the lake. Stanley was skipping stones, and Ella was crouched near the shore, building what looked like a castle out of rocks. For a moment, I stood there, just watching them. They were so happy, so carefree, and it hit me just how much was at stake. "Daddy, look!" Ella shouted, holding up a perfectly round stone. "It's a magic stone." I walked over and knelt beside her, taking the rock from her tiny hands. "What makes it magic?" She tilted her head, her little face scrunched in concentration. "It makes wishes come true," she said solemnly. I smiled, ruffling her hair. "Then I'd better keep it safe, huh?" She nodded seriously, and I slipped the rock into my pocket. It wasn't magic, of course, but in that moment, I wished with every fiber of my being that I could protect her and Stanley from the storm that was coming. That evening, after the kids had fallen asleep, my phone buzzed. Carol's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to let it ring out, to deny her any satisfaction. But another part of me, the part that needed to be in control, considered answering. Her voice, her manipulations, her threats. It was all so familiar. Yet this time, it felt different. This time, I was ready. Finally, I picked up. "What do you want, Carol?" I asked, skipping any pretense of politeness. "Derek, this has gone far enough," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Dragging lawyers into this? Posting cryptic crap on Facebook? What's wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I fired back. "You cheated on me, Carol. You lied. You betrayed me. And now you're acting like I'm the problem?" Do you even hear yourself? She let out an exaggerated sigh, dripping with frustration. Oh, spare me the martyr act. You think just because you work late and pay the bills that makes you a good husband? Newsflash, Derek, I was miserable. And if you weren't so blind, you would have seen that. Right? I said, my voice thick with sarcasm. Because clearly, the logical solution to being miserable is to sleep with a personal trainer and blow up your family. Her tone turned icy. You know what? Fine. If you want to play the victim, go ahead. But you're not taking my kids away from me. I'll fight you, Derek. And I'll win. Good luck with that, I said, keeping my voice calm but resolute. Because the moment this goes to court, the judge is going to see exactly what kind of mother you've been. There was a long pause on her end. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter but carried an edge that sent a chill down my spine. You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? I don't think, Carol. I know. I ended the call before she could say another word. The next day, I began putting the rest of my plan into action. The first step was hiring a private investigator. If there was more dirt to uncover about Carol or Thomas, I wanted it. Every lie, every betrayal, every secret. Next, I started building my own case. I went through old texts, emails, and messages, carefully piecing together a timeline of her affair. I also reached out to a few mutual friends, subtly feeling them out to see if they'd noticed anything unusual. The responses were mixed. Some were shocked when I told them the truth. Others were more guarded. Carol had clearly started spinning her web. I'd already seen one of her Instagram posts that morning. A smiling selfie with the caption, "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you never expected to fight. But I'm stronger than they think." It made me sick. She was carefully crafting her narrative, painting herself as the victim, the resilient mother fighting against the odds. I wasn't even named in her posts, but anyone who knew us could read between the lines. Pictures of her with the kids from months ago started popping up, accompanied by captions like, "A mother's love never wavers, no matter how hard others try to break her spirit." It was calculated, manipulative, and infuriating. But I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. Not this time. The war had officially begun, and I wasn't planning to lose. The days that followed were a strange mix of chaos and calm. On the surface, everything seemed serene. Stanley and Ella were adjusting to life at the cabin, spending their days swimming in the lake or running through the woods playing hide and seek. They were happy, and I did everything I could to shield them from the storm brewing behind the scenes. But underneath, the battle with Carol was escalating. The private investigator, let's call him Chester, was as good as advertised. Within 3 days, he handed me a report on Thomas Farrell that could have been lifted straight from a soap opera script. It turned out Thomas wasn't just a personal trainer, he was a walking disaster. The first bombshell? His finances. The guy was drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. Late payments piling up. Collection agencies hounding him. Credit cards maxed out. Unpaid loans piling up. And even a pending eviction notice for his apartment. That alone painted a grim picture. But there was more. A lot more. Chester had uncovered at least 4 other women Thomas had been seeing while he was with Carol, none of whom seemed to know about each other. And the cherry on top, Thomas had a record. Nothing earth-shattering, just a couple of arrests for drunk and disorderly conduct, but enough to show exactly what kind of person he was. Chester even managed to get surveillance photos of Thomas meeting one of his other girlfriends at a bar. The timestamp on the photos? Just 2 days after I'd walked out of my house. I stared at the report for a long time, anger simmering beneath the surface. Carol had risked everything. Our marriage, our family. For this guy, a walking, talking factory of red flags. But the anger didn't consume me. If anything, it sharpened my focus. I wasn't just going to expose Carol. I was going to make her regret every single lie she'd ever told. Later that week, I met with Oscar, my lawyer, to strategize our next steps. I handed him Chester's report, along with copies of Carol's texts and emails. Oscar flipped through the documents, his expression growing more confident with each page. "This is gold," he said, smirking. "Thomas's financial issues, the other women, his arrests. It all points to one thing: poor judgment on Carol's part. The court won't take kindly to her bringing someone like this into her kids' lives. What's our next move? I asked. We file, Oscar said firmly. We're going for primary custody, with supervised visitation for her until she can prove she's stable. And if she fights back? Oscar smiled, sharp and wolfish. Let her. She's fighting an uphill battle and she knows it. She might try to play dirty, but you've got the facts on your side. Facts always win. Carol didn't take the news well. When she was served with the divorce papers, she called me almost immediately. Her voice was a volatile mix of anger and panic. Are you serious, Derek? She snapped. You're actually doing this? Dead serious, I replied, my tone calm and unwavering. This is what happens when you destroy a family, Carol. Actions have consequences. Oh, spare me the lecture, she hissed. You think you're so righteous, so perfect. But I've got news for you. You're not. And if you think I'm just going to roll over and let you take my kids, you're delusional. They're not just your kids. I shot back, the edge in my voice undeniable. And I'm not trying to take them from you. I'm trying to protect them. From your lies, your selfishness, and from that loser you've been sneaking around with. Thomas isn't a loser, she spat. You don't even know him. Oh, I know plenty, I said, my voice sharp, like the fact that he's drowning in debt, or that he's juggling multiple women just like he juggles his unpaid bills. Or how about his record? You didn't know about that, did you? There was a long, heavy silence on her end. I could almost hear her mind scrambling to process the reality I just dropped on her. Don't believe everything you hear, she said finally, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Oh, I don't believe everything, I said, my tone cold. Just the things backed up by photos, records, and eyewitness accounts. Face it, Carol, you gambled and you lost. She didn't reply. Instead, she hung up on me. But Carol wasn't done. I knew her too well to think she'd go down without a fight. Sure enough, the next day, she made her move. It started with an email, a long, rambling message accusing me of being an absent father who never put the family first. She claimed that my custody battle wasn't about the kids, but about punishing her. And, of course, she insisted the children would be better off with her. It was textbook Carol. Shifting blame, spinning the narrative, and playing the victim. But unlike the past, I wasn't letting her take control of the story. Not this time. But that wasn't the worst of it. A few hours later, Bonnie called me. Her voice was tense, urgent. Derek, she said, you need to see this. She sent me a screenshot of a post Carol had made in a local moms group on Facebook. It read, I'm going through a really tough time right now. My husband is trying to take my kids away from me, using lies and manipulation to make me look like the bad guy. If anyone knows a good family lawyer, please DM me. I just want to protect my babies. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. A flood of sympathy from strangers who didn't know the truth. People calling me a monster. Telling Carol to stay strong. Offering advice and support. It was infuriating, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I sent the screenshot to Oscar. Perfect, he said when I called him. The more she tries to play the victim, the more obvious it'll be to the court that she's grasping at straws. Just stick to the plan, Derek. Let her dig her own grave. That night, as I tucked Stanley and Ella into bed, the weight of everything pressed heavily on my shoulders. Ella clung to her stuffed unicorn, her eyes already half closed. Stanley, however, was still wide awake. Dad, he whispered. Are we going to stay here forever? I knelt beside his bed, brushing the hair from his forehead. I don't know, buddy, I admitted honestly. But no matter what happens, I'm going to make sure you and your sister are safe. I promise. Later, as I sat alone in the dark living room, I realized something. This wasn't just about beating Carol anymore. It wasn't about revenge, anger, or even justice. It was about Stanley and Ella. They deserved better than the chaos Carol had created. They deserved stability, love, and a future free from lies. And I was going to give that to them, even if it meant burning everything else to the ground. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't backing down. Carol wasn't just a liar. She was a strategist. A manipulative, calculating opportunist who always knew how to make herself look like the hero in her own twisted story. And when people like her feel cornered, they don't surrender. They escalate. 2 days after her pity post in the moms group, I got an email from her lawyer. Apparently, she wasn't just defending herself in court. She was filing for full custody. Full custody. The audacity of it was almost funny. Almost. Her claim that I was emotionally neglectful, controlling, and unfit to provide a stable environment for the children. She even accused me of exhibiting irrational and impulsive behavior by suddenly removing the kids from their home without consulting her. I sat in the cabin's living room, staring at the email. My jaw tightened. My hands curled into fists. She was twisting everything. My decision to protect the kids, my fight to give them stability, and spinning it into a narrative where I was the villain. My first instinct was to call her and let her have it. To yell. To demand she stop dragging the kids into her mess. But then I remembered Oscar's advice. Don't give her anything she can use against you. So I didn't call her. I called Oscar. Expected this, he said, his voice calm, almost casual. When people like Carol feel cornered, they hit hard. They try to shift the focus off their own behavior by putting the other person on trial. What do we do? I asked. We fight fire with facts, Oscar replied. We show the court exactly who she is, exactly what she's done, and exactly why the kids are better off with you. I'll draft the response, but I need you to stay focused, Derek. Don't let her get into your head. His words stuck with me. This wasn't just about defending myself, it was about proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the better parent, that I could give Stanley and Ella the life they deserved. Carol was escalating, but I was ready. Let her hit hard. I'd hit harder with the truth. Oscar was right. This wasn't about me or my pride. This was about Stanley and Ella. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of paperwork and preparation. Oscar filed the divorce papers along with our petition for primary custody, attaching every piece of evidence we had. Texts, emails, the private investigator's report, everything. Meanwhile, Carol escalated her campaign. She messaged mutual friends, painting me as a bitter, vindictive husband who was using the kids as pawns. The whispers were designed to make me the villain, but I refused to engage. Then she showed up at the cabin unannounced one afternoon, pounding on the door like a lunatic. "Derek, open the door!" she shouted, her voice muffled through the wood. The kids were at the kitchen table working on a puzzle. I told them to stay put and walked to the door, cracking it open just enough to see her face. "What do you want, Carol?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild. She wasn't the composed, cunning woman I'd married. She looked frantic, desperate. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't just take them and hide here like some kind of coward." "I didn't take them," I said calmly. "They're my kids too. And I didn't hide, I protected them. From you." Her eyes narrowed into sharp slits. "From me? That's rich, Derek. Do you really think you're some kind of hero? You've been checked out of this marriage for years. You think paying bills and showing up to soccer games makes you a good dad? You don't even know how to connect with them." Her words stung, but I kept my voice steady. "You're right. I wasn't perfect, but at least I didn't bring a stranger into our house. At least I didn't lie to them, to you, or to myself. So spare me the lecture on parenting, Carol." Her face twisted with rage. "You're going to regret this," she snarled. "You think you're better than me? You think the court's going to hand you custody just because you've got some stupid emails? I'm their mother, Derek. No one's going to take them away from me." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so the kids wouldn't hear. "This isn't about you, Carol. It's about them. And if you really cared about them, you'd stop dragging them into your mess." She stared at me for a long moment, her chest heaving, her fists clenched. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off, her heels clicking against the porch. I watched as she got into her car and drove away. I didn't feel victorious. I felt drained. That night, I sat down with Stanley and Ella. It wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, but it was one I couldn't avoid any longer. "Hey guys," I said, sitting on the floor with them as they worked on their puzzle. "Can we talk for a minute?" Stanley looked up, his brow furrowed. "Are we in trouble?" "No, buddy," I said quickly. "You're not in trouble. I need to talk to you about Mommy." Ella's eyes widened. "Is Mommy coming here?" "No," I said gently. "Not right now. But things are going to be different for a while." Stanley frowned. "Because you and Mommy had a fight?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it's more than that. Mommy and we're not going to live together anymore. And I know that's hard to understand, but I want you to know it's not your fault. It's not about you or Ella. We both love you very much, and that's never going to change." Stanley didn't respond. He just looked down at the puzzle, his little hands curling into fists. Ella, on the other hand, crawled into my lap, clutching her unicorn tightly. "Will we still see Mommy?" she asked softly. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Yes," I said gently. "But it might not be as often. We're still figuring everything out. And I promise I'll keep you both safe no matter what." Ella seemed to accept that, snuggling closer into my lap. But Stanley stayed silent, his little brow furrowed. Finally, he looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw something deeper than anger or sadness. Something heavier. "Did Mommy do something bad?" he asked quietly. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I answer that without shattering his world? "She made some mistakes," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. People make mistakes sometimes, even grown-ups." Stanley didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded, his gaze drifting back to the puzzle. The next morning, I got an unexpected text from Bonnie. "Bonnie, you need to see this. Carol's unraveling." Attached was a screenshot of another post Carol had made in the moms group. "Divorce is the hardest thing a mother can go through, especially when your ex is trying to turn your own children against you. Stay strong, mamas. Never let anyone take away your babies." Below her post were dozens of comments from women offering their sympathy, calling me a manipulative narcissist and a terrible father. Carol was good. She knew how to play the role of the victim, how to tug at people's heartstrings. But the cracks in her story were starting to show. Bonnie's follow-up message came through seconds later. "Bonnie, she's losing control. Keep going. You've got this." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than exhaustion or anger. I felt hope. Carol's web of lies was unraveling, thread by thread. And when it finally collapsed, I'd be there to pick up the pieces. For Stanley, for Ella, and for myself. The courtroom smelled faintly of stale coffee and old wood polish, but the tension in the air was electric. Carol sat across from me, dressed in a perfectly tailored blazer and wearing a carefully constructed mask of serenity. She was playing the role of the wronged mother, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her lips pressed into a practiced, somber frown. I, on the other hand, was done pretending. This was it, the moment everything came to light. Oscar leaned over and whispered, "Remember, stay calm. Let her dig her own grave. We've got this." I nodded, keeping my gaze fixed on the judge as she entered and called the room to order. Carol's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with a voice that could cut glass, wasted no time. She launched into her narrative, carefully weaving a story that painted Carol as the victim. "Your Honor," she began, "my client is a dedicated mother who has been blindsided by her husband's erratic behavior. He removed the children from their home without her consent and has since used aggressive tactics to alienate her from them. This is a clear case of parental manipulation." Carol sat there, nodding solemnly as if every word was gospel. I bit the inside of my cheek, forcing myself to stay composed. This was part of her game, painting me as the villain to distract from her own actions. But Oscar had prepared me for this. When it was his turn, Oscar stood, exuding calm confidence as he addressed the court. "Your Honor," he said, "what my client seeks today is not vengeance or retaliation, but stability for his children. The evidence we've submitted will show that Mrs. Barnes's actions have repeatedly jeopardized the emotional and physical well-being of the children. This is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of fact." He placed a thick folder of evidence on the judge's desk. And then it began. For the next 2 hours, Oscar systematically dismantled Carol's facade. First came the texts and emails. Oscar projected them onto a large screen, the stark words displayed for everyone in the courtroom to see. Flirty conversations between Carol and Thomas. Plans to meet while I was at work. Messages that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. One particularly damning message flashed across the screen. A text where Carol bragged about how I'd never find out. Carol's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge waved her off, clearly unimpressed. Then came the private investigator's report. Oscar methodically walked the court through every detail. Thomas's financial issues, his other relationships, his arrests. Each revelation painted a damning picture, and when Oscar presented the photos of Thomas at the bar with another woman, complete with timestamps and dates, Carol shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The cracks in her confident demeanor were starting to show. But the real blow came when Oscar introduced the witness statements. 2 of our mutual friends had agreed to testify. Both confirmed that Carol had been absent and distracted for months, often leaving the kids with babysitters or me under the guise of working late. One of them, a mother from Stanley's soccer team, even recounted seeing Carol and Thomas together in a parking lot, holding hands. By the time Oscar finished presenting the evidence, Carol's lawyer looked like she'd aged a decade. When it was Carol's turn to speak, she stood, her hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor," she began, her voice wavering. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but that doesn't make me a bad mother. Everything I've done has been out of love for my children. Derek, he's painting me as a monster, but he's no saint. He's cold, distant, and emotionally unavailable. I felt invisible in my own marriage." Her voice cracked, and for a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she made her fatal mistake. "And as for Thomas," she continued, her tone hardening, "he's not the person Derek is making him out to be. Yes, we're friends, but that's all we are. Derek is twisting things to hurt me, and it's not fair." Oscar didn't flinch. He stood, holding up a printed email. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady. "This is a confirmation of a hotel reservation made by Mrs. Barnes under her name. The second guest? Thomas Farrell. The date? 3 weeks ago." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "This is not friendship. This is deceit." Carol's face went pale. Her lawyer buried her face in her hands. By the time the hearing concluded, the truth was clear to everyone in the room. The judge didn't deliberate for long. She ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of Stanley and Ella, with Carol receiving supervised visitation until she could prove her life was stable. The divorce proceedings weren't over, but this victory felt monumental. Carol sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. When the hearing ended, she stormed out of the courtroom without a word to me. Later that evening, I sat on the porch of the cabin, watching Stanley and Ella chase fireflies in the yard. Stanley was laughing, his arms flailing as he tried to catch one, while Ella twirled in circles, clutching her unicorn tightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Carol would still be a part of their lives, that much was inevitable. But the control she once wielded, the lies, the manipulation, it had all crumbled under the weight of her own choices. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Bonnie. Bonnie saw the ruling. "I'm happy for you, Derek. You deserved this." I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Me thanks. The kids deserved it more." That night, after the kids were asleep, I stood by the lake, staring out over the calm, glassy water. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned when I married Carol. I never thought I'd be here, raising 2 kids on my own, rebuilding my life from the ground up. But in a strange way, I felt free. Carol's betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to become something stronger, a better father, a better man. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Ella's magic stone, holding it in my palm. Its cool surface pressed against my skin as I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but for peace. For Stanley and Ella to grow up happy and safe. For the strength to keep moving forward no matter what. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that wish might actually come true. The war was over, and I had won.